The title of my speech is After 20 Years, a soft wall between the global information and knowledge. The fall of the Berlin Wall put an end to half a century of estrangement between Eastern and Western Europe and opened suddenly a gate to an unprecedented exchange of people and of ideas. Cultural cooperation and cultural diplomacy were caught in an explosive new set of challenges. Even more so, as the opening of the Iron Curtain caught Eastern Europe in an irresistible spin towards new means of communication in a new unexplored space and time vision that these new means offered us. As in a classic Agatha Christie mystery, a set of seemingly unrelated facts are suddenly woven into multiple possible scenarios. In this way, the implosion of the Soviet Empire inaugurated not only a new European unity manifest in the enlarged EU and NATO, but also a new global unity, a new pace and dynamics of the general process of globalization. A new world without walls challenges us as never before. Concerning globalization, while each discipline has generated its own idiosyncratic use of the term, certain characteristics seem to converge. Most scholars who study globalization today would agree that it is best characterized as a set of processes that tend to deterritorialize important economic, social, and cultural practices from their traditional boundaries in nation-states. It is very essence of a postmodern world and involves even a kind of post-geography. The processes of change are structured by four interrelated formations. First, post-national form of production and distribution of goods and services, fueled by growing levels of international trade, foreign direct investment and capital flows. Second, information, communication and media technologies that facilitate exchanges and instantaneously connect people across vast transnational areas. Third, growing levels of worldwide migration. And fourth, the resultant cultural transformation of exchanges that challenge traditional values and norms. Is globalization simple modernization? Is it westernization in fast forward? It is imperialism now driven by the extraordinary American hyperpower. Is it unfettered American capitalism sans frontières? Alternatively, it is a phenomenon or a set of phenomena of a completely different order. While globalization, especially when narrowly defined as free markets and free capital flows, has generated doubts and fears, its relevance for social science and education is huge and must be recognized as such. For some economists, lack of globalization, not globalization itself, is a cause of poverty and misery in the developing world. Is globalization a totally new phenomenon? Without a historical perspective, it is difficult to distinguish what might be new and a break from previous cycles of globalization from what mimics and repeats previous processes. What, if anything, is new about globalization? A number of prominent scholars have claimed that globalization is best conceptualized as part of the long process of change arguably centuries in the making. They remind us that certain features of globalization today are not necessarily new. Neither large-scale immigration nor international capital flows are unprecedented. Harvard historian John Cosworth, for instance, identifies 4 distinct cycles of globalization in the Western Hemisphere. First, the opening of transoceanic conquest, communication and trade from 1492 to 1565. Second, the kidnapping and forced migration of Africans and the subsequent establishment of slave plantations in the New World from 1650 to 1790. Third, the export-led growth in the Belle Epoque between 1880 and 1930. And fourth, a new globalization cycle beginning in the mid-1980s. Cosworth argues that the current cycle of globalization in regard to demographic and economic processes is in fact quite weak compared to previous cycles. For example, current migration flows are proportionally smaller than in previous periods. The foreign-born population of the Americas, including South-varied countries of the United States, Argentina, and Brazil, a century ago, was proportionally larger than at the turn of the millennium. Over the last decade, growth has been elusive and inequality a constant and growing concern. Cosworth's analysis suggests that globalization tends to exact short-term cost, paid in decreasing health and well-being and in increasing inequality, while generating long-term growth, especially in economic productivity. Cosworth observes, on the other hand, that education has a much more prominent role to play than in previous cycles of global change. Educators must develop an agenda to facilitate the incorporation and growing numbers of immigrant children worldwide and develop curricular and pedagogical programs to impart the cross-cultural skills children will need to thrive in their historical moment and emerge as agents of change to combat growing worldwide inequalities. In spite of these judicious arguments, we must observe a fact that was not taken into account. The fact that this contemporary process of globalization is unique in its communication and media dimension, which makes it a unique phenomenon. It may be not the first time that huge masses of people move from China to Europe or from Africa to America. It is, however, the first time in history that these migratory waves are broadcast all over the world, exchange emails, search with Google briefly, and aware of their own condition and visible to us all. The current cycle of globalization is in part the product of new global media information and communication technologies that instantaneously connect people, organizations, and systems across vast distances. While in 1980 there were only 2 million computers worldwide, in 1995 the number totaled more than 150 million, 90% being personal computers. In 2000, 80 million new users logged on to the internet for the first time. The cost of telephone calls has plummeted owing to satellite communication technology. For example, the price of the 3-minute phone call from New York to London dropped from about $250 in 1930 to about $30 in 1970 and to less than 20 cents by the year 2000. In addition to creating and circulating images, information, and data, these technologies have the promise of freeing people from the constraints of space and time. These new technologies of globalization are rapidly and irrevocably changing the nature of learning, work, thought, entertainment, and the impersonal patterning of social relations. That's why contemporary globalization is generating changes of a magnitude comparable to the emergence of agriculture 10,000 years ago, or the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago. It will demand fundamental rethinking of the aims and processes of education. 4 domains are at the heart of the new global impulses affecting youth and education worldwide: the globalization and economy and capital, the globalization of media, information and communication technology, large-scale immigration, and the globalization of cultural production and consumption. Together, these currents are reshaping the experience of youth in and out of schools the world over. Now, education will need to encompass new skills, abilities, and understandings. First, understanding the global system. Second, the ability to think analytically and creatively within disciplines. Third, the ability to tackle problems and issues that do not respect disciplinary boundaries. Fourth, knowledge of and respect for one's own cultural traditions. Fifth, knowledge of other cultures and traditions, which should both be an end in itself and means to interacting civilly and productively with individuals from different cultural backgrounds, both within one's own society and across the planet. 6. Fostering of tolerance and appreciation across racial, linguistic, national, and cultural boundaries. Will the next generation of youth become global citizens, eating McDonald's hamburgers, drinking Starbucks coffee, and using a globalized English to communicate with each other online? McDonald's has emerged as the very incarnation of globalization because on an average day, the company serves nearly 50 million customers in over 30,000 restaurants located in 118 countries. World Wide English is an idiom which has conquered by the whole world because of the internet. But to limit our means to these byproducts of the contemporary technologies impoverish American or English tradition, not only other languages of other cuisines. If that is the case, then the diversity in the cultures and experiences of the next generation may disappear. In fact, many scholars disagree with the notion that globalization is destroying cultural diversity by homogenizing cultural practices the world over. Local vectors always transform global products, rendering them meaningful in terms of local sensibilities, social practices, and cultural models. For example, the film Titanic was the most popular movie in China in 1997 because the majority of moviegoers identified the tragedy of the film with their personal experiences during the Cultural Revolution. The current rapid exchanges of images, facts, and artifacts across national and cultural borders may be seen as a media convergence, which trends to be multi-directional, reflecting the circulation of products from west to east, as well as a continuous concomitant cultural flow from east to west, undergoing metamorphoses that are both unpredictable and contradictory. This phenomenon offers a theoretical challenge to the widely popular cultural imperialism and the cultural homogeneity hypothesis by highlighting the critical role of local meaning-making system in interrupting and reshaping global media and cultural exchanges, nearly always recasting them in autochthonous terms. Yet, a paradox of globalization is that as it unites, it also divides the world between those who can access and manipulate the new technologies and those who are left behind, stuck, so to speak, in local tools and local context. The facts are even more disturbing as we learn that the technologies of globalization present unique opportunities and challenges for education. An eminent Argentinian physician, psychologist, and brain scientist, Antonio Batro, one of the founders of the new field of mind, brain, and education, examined the extraordinary enabling potential that the digital world offers those with disabilities and children growing up in out-of-the-way places. They open up new opportunities for education, particularly among those who have traditionally been shut out, thus more fully developing their cognitive, emotional, and social potential. Batro claims that the ability to make a simple change in a state of the system, what he calls the click option, it is a universal skill that has both evolutionary and developmental origins. He refers to computer use among a hunting and gathering Bushman group in the Kalahari Desert. Batro claims that a universal digital skill develops quite early in life and that such universal digital skills have important implications for education, particularly in their potential revolutionary effect for special education and for people living in remote areas. 100 years ago, anthropologists took long journeys to remote locations to study exotic social, institutional, and cultural beliefs. Today, globalization delivers the exotic to the anthropologist's own backyard. Mexican culture is now alive and well in New York, where by the year 2000, roughly 500,000 Mexican citizens resided, with well over 300,000 in New York City alone. In exchange, over the past decade, anthropologists have developed a taste for such topics as transnationalism, cultural hybrids and dualities, mass media, and persisting cultural conflicts, all brought about by globalization. These peculiar experiences can and perhaps must be transferred in terms of cultural diplomacy, for it is obvious that the core of these informal diplomatic processes has to do with a cultural dialogue and intercultural exchange. Here, we should also examine the concept of acculturation, which goes in pair with the metaphor of the soft power. I must tell you why I am not a partisan of this cluster of images. In my own experience, acculturation never works as a download from the so-called superior cultural agent to the immature recipient. In a way, there is no cultural transfer, for each culture picks what it needs from the intercultural market and invents its own version on facts. As for soft power, it has to be understood as radically different from power as such, or hard power. Hard power is imposed, is that not have to be accepted to exist. Soft power, instead, does not exist if it is not accepted, chosen willingly by its recipients. Cultural, for example, half of the African countries are francophone, the other half anglophone, because in the past they were colonies either of Britain or the French. In the past century, Romania was essentially francophone because in the wake of the French Revolution, its intellectual and political elite did choose to be so. Cultural diplomacy has to seduce, and in the globalized internet era, it is rather a challenge to seduce. In my view, however, cultural diplomacy and culture in general has even a greater task. It has to promote knowledge, whereas the general global process produced mostly information. Knowledge is a must in a fluid world, both because it is only deep knowledge that offers the flexibility needed to adapt, assimilate, and understand the dynamics and the complexity of a changing surrounding, and because only knowledge may be the haven in our stressing and complicated lives. The current world crisis has raised a question marked over a great number of options that the last half a century considered as implicit and make us reflect on the extent to which our own choices have contributed to the aggravation of the global crisis. If we agree on the fact that besides the rotten credits, the balloons of imaginary money, and all the speculative ways that have brought on all of us the present financial crisis, there is one common denominating cause: a deep value crisis. We should also keep in mind that the history of past crises of this proportion shows that our fate will be determined less by the event itself than by how we respond. That is why we must come back to the humanistic sciences, which are, in today's society, endangered knowledge species must win back their epistemic dignity. Cultural diplomacy is a privileged way to communicate in spite of boundaries and to build a shared soft power of an international fraternity of cultures, of knowledge, and of goodwill, a fraternity able to mold the complete human being that we need in our world without walls. Thank you.